Hi, I'm Chloe Brinsford and I'm a textile designer specialising in embroidery and print for fashion and interiors. I'm applying for the role at the King's Foundation as this, and I'm going to show you my portfolio. Collection I did all about florals. I really like how I brought out the vibrant colours and really experimented with abstract shapes. These lines and marks that I've made really helped me visualise how I can translate those paintings into embroidery. These similarly are paintings I did using the Old Masters technique, which is a technique where I chose Old Masters paintings and I picked out colours to apply to my own drawings. For the painting on the right, I used the same technique but in relation to happiness. Purples, blues, yellows, those are all my kind of colours that I really like using in my work. And I think the pop of pink really helps just elevate that painting. These paintings were part of my final collection and I painted them in a way that I could translate into embroidery. So the painting on the left, I could really see be used into I could see it being turned into a beading sample, and on the right the applique. These next prints were experimenting with repeats, seeing how I could use one block design to create a repeat in different ways. The one on the right has foiling on it, which is a technique that I loved using for embellishments. You can see how I played around with borders and colour. So this collection was based on a trip to Bristol and taking inspiration from the harbour and looking at water features. Looking at things below the surface of the water. My embroidered piece called Whirlpools on the left was an interpretation of the harbour floor, using many different techniques like dispersed dyeing fabric, seed stitching, French knots, running shells to create shell shapes, using knitted bases and beading into it. It was something I really enjoyed. It was a very labour intensive process, but it was worth it. So these samples were part of the same body of work, again using foiling, scrap threads to create jellyfish type shapes with the motifs, mirroring made up creatures or floating bits of debris. I felt like the sample on the left was a more sophisticated look, which is an element I often strive to achieve in my work as a whole. So this was one of my final samples from my collection, the Fairground collection, looking at my own photos as inspiration from when I was little, so for motifs like me and my mum at the fairground. I experimented with large buttons and tassels to create 3D elements in this sample. I used a cut-off piece of fabric. I left all the imperfections. As I think it makes it more organic, and it's kind of nice to see like the sustainable side of the samples, and I think it kind of enhanced it. My collection, called Thicket Pie, inspired by imagery from the Holborn Museum, was a collection based on earthy tones that can be found in a thicket, using blackberries as inspiration for the electric blue beading and more muted purples, and I think it really elevated the tote bag I made translated from my original sample. I also made my own label for the collection whilst also considering price. I found making something out of my design a really rewarding process, and it really helped me find solutions to design flaws that I might have faced. This was another sample from my Thicket Pie collection, in which I made a very offbeat design inspired by blackberries, which was a lot of hand dyeing and hand embroidery. This was a final painting I made for a live brief with Hallmark, where my theme was emotional connection. I chose to choose daydreaming as a title, where I looked at scenes of mundane life. I particularly like how in this collection all of my imagery was abstract, as even though I didn't translate these into textile pieces, my products weren't traditional. I was experimenting with crocheting a bag over plastic and testing what materials I could use. I particularly like this large painting side by side with my crochet bag to see how I could translate the design. This was another large-scale painting from this collection, looking at the skyline from my kitchen window one evening, trying to capture the beauty of mundane life. From this collection, I created a froshki wrap as well out of a scrap piece of cotton. This was embroidered into it using French knots, using wool and floss to create varying different scale in my stitches. I think this is very effective and I'm really proud of how this turned out, and you can see it wrapped there as well. And this is what my final collection looks like all together in a photo shoot. And these are just a couple of samples from my current collection I'm working on, looking at florals and architecture. This is a ditzy print I developed on Photoshop, and on the right I've used pleats to manipulate the fabric to create lines, whilst also using scrap trim. I've crocheted into it to create 3D elements. And this is another piece where I've taken a sketch I did from a cathedral and I translated it directly using running stitch and beading. I think Diamante's allowed the surrounding fabric to speak for itself and create contrast, allowing embroidery to be the main focus of this very large sample, but I think it was worth it. I really like how this turned out.
What skills do you feel you can bring to this role? What is your best skill as a designer?
I would say my best skill as a designer is using paint to translate into embroidery, and also being resourceful when I find my materials, such as beads. I find them off necklaces, and I go to charity shops and I really use what's around me to create my pieces. And I think this is really important when considering any job role, as you need resourcefulness to get the job done, but also as the industry is focusing more on sustainability, you need to sustainability.
What aspect of the role are you most excited about developing or learning more about?
I would say I'm most excited about learning tambour embroidery, as I know this is something that is used within couture in Chanel, and something that I could learn from the King's Foundation. There's many techniques that I've been researching as the course goes on, and I'm just very excited to embrace a lot of new techniques from the King's Foundation.